But it turns out that they were, as Iraq was claiming all along, that the Iraqis were using these trucks to manufacture hydrogen for artillery balloons. Now, while all this was going on, there were people who would know who were disclaiming these facts. Scott Ritter, everybody in this room has probably heard of, was the chief UN's weapon inspector from 1991 to 1998, and he was crying at the top of his voice, both in the press, on television, in the newspapers, that he'd been there, he'd been inspecting Iraq for years, and they had no WMDs. Hans Blix as well. He was the head of the UN Monitoring, Verification, and Inspection Commission from 2000 to 2003. Again, he said, we've been inspecting them for a very long time. They don't have any. Now, we did know, as Jacob referred to earlier, that they did previously have weapons of mass destruction because we did supply them to them. According to Matt Kelly of the Associated Press, quote, the CDC and the Biological Sample Company, the American Type Culture Collection, sent strains of all the germs Iraq used to make weapons, including anthrax, the bacteria that make botulinum toxin, and the germs that cause gas gangrene, the records show. Iraq also got samples of other deadly pathogens, including West Nile virus. These are the roots of some of the weapons that they used against the Iranians in the 1980s. But the WMD rationale fell through. They had these people from the UN disclaiming it, and of course, in 2008, we have yet to find WMD there. I think we can give up the ghost there. So they had to find other rationales. The next one they used was that Saddam Hussein had ties to Al-Qaeda. So fact to remember, Saddam Hussein had no ties to Al-Qaeda. Like I said, none of the 11 attackers were from Iraq, but Bush kept on repeating over and over again, if not explicitly, that Al-Qaeda was in Baghdad, that by innuendo there was an association. So here's one statement from Bush. We know that Iraq and the Al-Qaeda terrorist network share a common enemy, the United States of America. We know that Iraq and Al-Qaeda have had high-level contacts that go back a decade. Some Al-Qaeda leaders who fled Afghanistan went to Iraq. Again, we know he's got ties with Al-Qaeda. A nightmare scenario, of course, is that he becomes the arsenal for a terrorist network where they could attack America and he'd leave no fingerprints behind. Well, no link was ever established. If you want a really good sample of some research done on this, I highly recommend Jim Bovard's work, his books, and also his article, Saddam as the 20th Hijacker, which you can find in Freedom Daily. Now, they tried other rationales when this fell through. Bring democracy to Iraq, which we have now. They have democracy. And the most laughable one, better to fight the terrorists over there than to fight them here. But as the rationales changed, just remember there were no WMD there, and we really had no reason for invading Iraq. But invade we did. There are still, I'm sure, many Joe Sixpacks out there that think that Saddam Hussein attacked the World Trade Center. And so they were able to take the country to war. Now, a fact to remember, again, many people in the Bush administration wanted to invade Iraq before 9/11. There is a think tank called the Project for a New American Century, co-founded by Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan, who in January 1998 posted an open letter to Bill Clinton asking for the forcible removal of Saddam Hussein. That letter reads in part, the policy of containment of Saddam Hussein has been steadily eroding over the past several months. As the recent events have demonstrated, we can no longer depend on our partners in the Gulf War coalition to continue to uphold sanctions or to punish Saddam when he blocks or invades UN inspection. We urge you to articulate this aim and to turn your administration's attention to implementing a strategy for removing Saddam's regime from power. And here's the important part. This will require a full complement of diplomatic, political, and military efforts. So back in '98, 3 years before 9/11, they were calling for Bill Clinton to send the military into Iraq, get rid of Saddam. Of the 18 people who signed this open letter, see if you recognize some of these names. Elliot Abrams, Richard Armitage, John Bolton, Paul Dobriansky, Zalmai Khalilzad, Richard Pearl, Peter Rodman, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and Robert Zoellick. All these 10 people were all in the Bush administration 3 years later, more than half the signers asking for the invasion of Iraq. So they got us to go in, and we're still there today. But once we got in there, debate started to occur as to what we're going to do once we're in there. The decision had been made, the military was starting to invade. How would we pay for it? How many people are we going to need? So, fact to remember, we were told this war would pay for itself. Iraq is filled with oil, and we could use the revenues from the sales of this oil. It was hardly going to cost us a thing. New York Times article talking about Paul Wolfowitz testifying before Congress said, Mr. Wolfowitz spent much of the hearing knocking down published estimates of the cost of war and rebuilding, saying the upper range of $95 billion was too high, and that the estimates were almost meaningless because of the variables. Moreover, he said such estimates and speculation that post-war reconstruction costs could climb even higher ignored the fact that Iraq is a wealthy country with annual oil exports worth $15 to $20 billion. Quote, to assume we're going to pay for it all is just wrong. I would give anything if this war only cost us $95 billion right now. But according to a book by Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz and his co-author Linda Bilmes, the Iraq War is now, and the whole war on terrorism, is running us $12.5 billion per month, and the long-run costs, including macroeconomic effects, could be well over $3 trillion, which is a far cry from $95 billion. Fact to remember, we have sent over 1 million troops to the Middle East, which again is a tad over the estimates. Four-star General Eric Shinseki was admonished by Donald Rumsfeld for testifying before Congress that a war in Iraq would need, quote, something on the order of several 100,000 soldiers. Rumsfeld testified, the idea that it would take several thousand U.S. forces, I think, is far off the mark. And it was far off the mark. Since 2001, according to a recent RAND study, approximately 1.64 million U.S. troops have been deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. We also are a country that hires mercenaries. Blackwater, which is a self-described private military company, now trains 40,000 people per year as private security. But honestly, they're mercenaries. So fact to remember, the U.S. hires mercenaries. We have killed untold thousands of civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan. You don't see it discussed too often because people just don't really know how many people we're killing over there. The military doesn't seem to care because they don't keep account. I don't think it's important. But the group IraqBodyCount.org has tried to make the best scientific estimates that they can. They cross-check media reports, hospital morgue reports, and try to get the best estimate. And they estimate that somewhere between 84 and 91,000 civilians have been killed in Iraq. Tens of thousands of Iraqis killed. Now, we do know that it's common knowledge that over 4,000 American soldiers have been killed in the war on terrorism right now. But another fact to remember is that many more are coming home maimed and injured. Battlefield medicine technology has improved to such a great extent that we are able to save soldiers that decades ago it would just have been an impossibility, which is good. I mean, you know, who wouldn't want to live? But they're coming home with horrible injuries. It is estimated right now that approximately 30,000 soldiers now have been physically disabled in the war, and that as many as 300,000 now suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome. And you can see it popping up in the country now. The suicide rate among soldiers is skyrocketing, as is the incidences of domestic abuse.